Oh, and I forgot to ask, how do you want to be introduced? President Foxman, Noah? Do you have a last name, or are you like
I
share?
I don't share my last name, but either Noah or President Foxman or both. I'm
Fair
flexible on
enough.
that.
All right. All right. So we were going to as I recall, you wanted to talk about the generational handoff or
Mhm.
lack thereof. Um, you did a little video about it. I watched the video a couple months ago. I guess by now it's been.
It's been a little
It seems, yeah, boomerality has been with us for only 2 months or so, but it seems like a forever meme. So, why don't you start out by just explaining what you mean by generational handoff and uh, how you think it applies to the debate over uh, boomerality, uh, various, one form or another of generational resentment, the challenges of our times with regard to the difficulties that uh, younger people are experiencing, uh, trying to on ramp, if I may, into the economy or wherever else you see it. So why don't you just start out and with
yeah.
what you're thinking?
That video was very much trying to play the card of the mediator between the two sides, and so you have the tendency of younger people to look at past generations and say, "You didn't give us what we needed to be successful. Um, the advice you're giving us is bad advice. It's not applicable to us." Um, and so, what's wrong with that? And then you have the older generation saying, "We're giving you what we feel like is all needed. Why aren't you taking our advice? Um, that's why you're failing." Maybe it would be the way that it would be put, and trying to find a way to express this interesting way that there's this generational gap that exists where you have people who um, were born not in a computer context. Um, their social structures were much more firm. And as we've kind of progressed on, the context is entirely shifted. And so, how do we facilitate communication between two groups of people um, without any of the shared context? And so that was my pitch is wisdom is that translation layer. Um, wisdom is the ability to take um, or to understand the story in its context, be able to abstract it in a way that's almost beyond words, and then reapply it to a different context entirely. Um, and so my point was the younger generation is the one who's asking for something, so they can't sit around expecting that the older generation will be giving it to them. They are going to have to take the initiative on this, and so um, both listening and trying to do the work of wisdom of taking these stories of this advice and understanding the wisdom principles behind it. And yeah, that's it's been a lot of my processing, at least in that video.
So, okay, just so everyone knows, how old are you?
I'm 24.
24.
Yes.
And unusual for your age, you're married, right?
Hmm.
Because there are not a lot of married 24-year-old guys
Yeah,
out there. It doesn't seem like
not too many, but
there's some.
depends on the context too.
What? Tell me a little bit about your family background. Did you only child, or siblings, raised in the church? What kind of church, if you were, that sort of
Yeah,
thing?
yeah. I am the oldest of two children. My father is or was a um, pastor for the Assemblies of God, and my mother was an English teacher when I was young. and they both have gone off to do very different things since then. But yeah, growing up in that context, going to church, um, every Sunday, and I was very much in that environment, very Pentecostal kind of focused church upbringing.
You seem very intellectual. Was that a good fit for you? I mean, it's because I don't. You
Mm-hmm.
carry yourself. You carry yourself much more like a Calvinist than an Assembly of God.
I like to think that the best situation is that you should always be in a church that makes you uncomfortable, and that's part of the reason why I think I think I'm kind of naturally inclined towards something that would be Calvinist or like Catholic, and that's how I know that that would not be a good environment for me. I would feel too comfortable, and there's something stretching about being in a place that makes you uncomfortable, and you get to be around people who see the world differently.
The difficulties that you described, are these something that you've experienced in your lifetime, or are you just observing it in others and offering a kind of uh, diagnosis and prescription as
No,
a unaffected party?
I think I've been in those situations, and I am in those situations, and so part of it is with every video I make, I try to make advice for myself, um, and because I don't know if I can help anybody else, but at least if I can help myself, then it was worth it. And so that's the philosophy I take into it. So my hope is that at least I come out of it with an understanding that will move me closer to something functioning.
How so did you experience? What would be? I mean, is it just
Mhm.
like when you talk about? Because it seems like you're talking. Advice has come up a couple times, and it comes up a lot in your video, as I
Mhm.
recall. Advice from the older generation to the younger, and in this case, you're advising back, right?
Mhm.
Um, but ideas or advice did not seem to me to be what, say, Michael Sartori was addressing in his videos.
Yeah.
Um,
Can I give
yeah,
my thought on that? I think
sure.
part of that's a I don't know if you're familiar with the term doomer, but that's but it's kind of like nihilist kind of it's a nihilist take, I think. Is to take this as well, uh I don't know. I think what Michael is talking about is about institutional um the institutions that have been passed down and these kind of elements of things. And my take is completely devoid of talking about that because I don't see a lot of these institutions um, surviving uh, and doing the job that they're made to do. And so my goal is, assuming the institution doesn't survive, how can you still you still survive through it? Uh, Maybe would be the way I put it.
What it would be the where's the point at which we find ourselves most in crisis between the two generations? Is it economic? Is it social? Is it moral? Uh, there's certainly some division politically. We, at least if the polls are to believed. I butchered that sentence, but I think the folks understand what I'm saying.
Mhm.
If the polls are to be believed, and I still barely got that out, there seems to be a great divide politically between younger people and older people. Um, is it sexual? Is it real? Is it relationship between male and female? I mean, see, I get the impression that what you're kind of describing is like the Peanuts characters in the
Mhm.
classroom, and the teacher's going is talking in all the Charlie Brown cartoons. Wah 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 wah. And so and I kind of get the impression that that's how you are sort of hearing as a younger person, listening to older people talk to you about life and what to do and how to manage the future and so on and so forth. And it's just like noise. It's like you're not talking to me. You're not talking to the things that matter to me. And it's just that wah 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 wah.
Yeah. How would I put it? There was a conversation. I don't know if you were able to catch the not an estuary chat on Chad's channel recently,
Mm-hmm.
but part of that conversation dealt a little bit with this towards the end, especially because Sherry brought this up, and I think we're still trying to understand each other a little bit, and so I've been trying to get better at describing this phenomenon. But Sherry said something along the lines of one of the things that she notices about the younger generation is that they don't have a drive to rebel, to be like the children in her youth and the one who she saw around her, who would sneak out of their house and hang out with friends and go to parties. But there's not this intuition, and that maybe that's something that this generation needs. And my argument in response was something like, for rebellion to work, you have to have an institution that you're rebelling against. But I don't see any of this institutional power surviving to this point. Um, and forgive me, because I know that this is overgeneralizing, and so give me some grace with this. But the generalization I see it as, you have the boomer generation, and the older generation. They're around during the civil rights movement. They're seeing the breakdown of these structures that ought to have been broken down, and they see that the arc of history is the rebellion against the tyrant. And so there's a movement against that, and there's almost like that's the gift that's being passed down to the next generation, is like, continue my work, continue to fight this fight. And I think it does happen, right? It happens through Gen X, it happens through millennials. I think it hits Gen Z, and Gen Z is looking around and saying, what's left? Like, what am I supposed to be fighting against? There's nothing here. And the only thing that is here is the gift of rebel. And so you have two different paths, or there's a few different paths ahead, is the way I see it. There's the path of a rejection of like boomer morality, which is something like all people are created in the image of God, or something like that. And so you see that with the manosphere. You see that with racism, anti-Semitism. Like that's a certain reaction.
Back up just for a second.
Yeah.
Manosphere. How do you see the manosphere fitting into that?
It's the rebellion against the boomer morality that's been passed down. And I don't mean boomer morality in a negative way. I'm saying,
or you mean like woke ideology? Is that what you mean by that?
No, I mean that in a very
Because that's not boomer.
No, I'm talking about like the civil rights movement, like that morality. Like, again, I'm not saying this in a bad way. I'm saying
Yeah, I'm just trying to understand. That's fine.
The priorities of the boomer generation, I would say, or something like that, of creating more equitable space.
Maybe I don't understand what the manosphere is. Are you thinking more like Proud Boys? Is that manosphere?
No, but I think that's manosphere is much closer. If you haven't heard of it, it's something like
I've heard it,
like the red pill. It's a little closer to that. Like it's a lot of not treating women as people kind of stuff.
Right.
Trying to define masculinity.
So that's a rebellion
dominant
against the civil rights values of the 60s, 70s, and into the 80s. Yeah. Okay. Sorry. I apologize for interrupting. I just was trying to understand, make the connections.
Yeah. So no worries. I'll continue from there real fast.
Yeah.
So that's one reaction, is to rebel against that, to rebel against that that intuition that all people are created equal, that we should all like get along in unity. There is the reaction of I need to find an institution. I'm going to go hyper traditional. Let's go to the Orthodox Church. Let's go to Catholicism. Let's start an estuary. I need an institution of some sort. It's like I'm desperately finding something. And then there is nothing. And I think that's a lot of people where they kind of sit down in resignation and they say, my rebellion is against the gift of rebellion by saying I won't do anything. Like I'm going to sit down and just not engage. And that's the almost like quiet quitting. That's that same kind of phenomenon. Mm-hmm. Is the like it doesn't matter, so I'm just going to detach and I have some more points on that, but I wanted
going.
to kind of hand that over.
Keep going, because I think you're filling it in, but it's not quite done.
So with the quitting one, my wife works in public health, specifically with kids who abuse substances, and all the data is coming out that kids are using less and less substances overall and getting less addicted. And there's some who read that as that's great. Like that's awesome. And honestly, it's probably best if kids are not getting addicted to substances like alcohol and vaping less. Some who read it as this is a social failure, that these kids are not socialized enough that they would normally do these in social settings, but now they're not in social settings, so they won't do it. My mind goes to a very different place, and it's a little bit darker, which is for many people, substances are kind of one of the last places that they're going to try to find stability, try to find meaning. And I think we're seeing a lot of people come to the end of that road and saying, this isn't going to give me meaning. And it can go very well from there, and it can also go very poorly from there. And so, yeah, I don't have a very optimistic take on that data.
Where do you see yourself in terms of your life trajectory? Are you happy where you're at? Do you feel like you have a path and are well on your way, or still discovering? Because you're young, you're a very young man. Mm-hmm. You could easily have another 70 years or more on this planet. Mm-hmm. So how do you feel about where you're at and where you're going? Personally, just you.
Yeah. I think there's a few pieces. One of them is there's been a lot of searching of like what does my future look like? What is going into that? There've been a lot of things that I've like kind of latched onto and then realized this is not something to build my life around. At one point that was politics. At other points it was philosophy. And then kind of coming to the conclusion that it has to look something like sainthood, but not sure what that actually means, right? Like trying to still understand, like, okay, I know what the word is, but I don't know what this means practically for my life.
Yeah.
So that's still where I am at my journey, is trying to find out what that means. And then also being pulled by this. I've been not tempted, but I think I've been convicted to refer to myself as a recovering nihilist, and thinking of estuary as AA for nihilism. And the image in my head is saying like, "Hi everyone, I'm Noah. Hi Noah. I've had hope for 3 days now," and something like that. And so still wrestling with that and finding out like when you don't feel like you necessarily have a path ahead, it's kind of hard to hold on to hope, because hope implies that you're going somewhere. But if you don't know where you're going, then there's a little bit of ambiguity.
Okay, recovering nihilist with a Pentecostal background. when did Christianity or your family traditional religion break down for you that it allowed you to become a nihilist? If you're a recovering nihilist, it means you were a nihilist at some point.
Hmm.
When
Yeah,
did all
I'd say
that?
that was high
When
school
did the
for me.
wheels come off the bus?
Yeah, I think a lot of it was a few things. For one, my conception of um, religion of God was uh, I don't know. I think it's hard to say because you can say like I thought this, but I wouldn't have said it. But I think this is actually what I was thinking in my mind, and then I never made the connection later that Christianity is this one part of my life, and then there's all the rest of the part of life, and I don't see how this fits into this. Sorry, I'm using my hands. You might not, the audience might not see what I'm doing, but that 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 Christianity has its section, and then the rest of my life has its other section, and I don't see how they blend together, especially in regards to my interest in like history or philosophy or any of these pieces. I didn't see how Christianity fit into that, and then going to school, I went to a public school in a very um, affluent area, and there's a lot of drug abuse by a lot of my peers, and I just got this sense that like it was all kind of a sham, that it was all just kind of a show put on. The classroom was
Mm-hmm.
that. Um, I remember that we would be assigned readings, and I would hear contradictory things from the lectures. I would hear the teacher say one thing, and then the book says another thing, and the teachers didn't like to get challenged on that. And so I came to the conclusion that if the teacher doesn't want to do their job, then I'm not going to do my job. And I ended up getting D's and um, C's for a few years in high school just because I had lost any interest in doing that.
Did you go to college?
I did, yeah.
State, Bible, Christian?
State college,
Okay.
yeah,
Uh,
for computer science.
okay. Not evergreen.
No,
Had to ask because you're in the Northwest, so I had to ask. Um, hmm.
I can tell you how I got
Yeah,
out of
go
that
ahead.
too, if you want.
Sure, absolutely.
I This is the one where this name is always part of my story, and it's funny to me because it still hurts a little bit. But I remember coming home one day, and my dad is watching something on the TV, and he said, "Oh, there's this guy's interesting," and he's like a Christian apologist or something. And so I don't have any a special interest in seeing this, but he's like, no, he's like really good and interesting. So I sit down and watch, and I just am captured by this Ravi Zacharias guy,
Oh.
and just the way he's able to blend all these pieces together, to be able to talk about how the world has a meaning, and how Christianity is not an isolated instance, but it carries significance to every part of the world if it's true. And so he mentions a few names and quotes a few things, and so I'm hunting down all these connections I can find in any of his stuff, and I come across G.K. Chesterton, and orthodoxy, and then orthodoxy is just kind of what, I don't know, I credit as somewhat saving me.
Hmm. Yeah, Chesterton is particularly good.
Mhm.
Uh, Ravi Zacharias,
Yeah,
uh, problematic character in the long term.
indeed.
How did that affect you, if you don't mind me asking? Did the
Um,
revelations about him come out before before you ran into his material,
oh, it was
or
after by a
after?
few years. Yeah,
Okay.
I was in college, probably around my third year when like there was initial stuff. There was some kind of shady stuff that was going on earlier, but there were excuses made that I wasn't. I was like, oh yeah, whatever. Like, um, you know, there's some accusations that can always be thrown about anybody. And then when like the really bad stuff came out, and it was the Christianity Today article that came out about
Right.
all these women, I was like,
After he
okay,
died.
yeah. And
Right.
so I was like, okay, I'll have to take this seriously. And it was that same time there was a YouTuber I watched quite a bit of his videos, and he didn't have anything nearly as bad, but that happened at the same point.
Mm.
And I had to consider like, oh, what do I even do? Like, how do I process um, this? How do I separate the wheat from the chaff? And um, luckily, you know I didn't have any like deconstruction-y kind of stuff out of that, but um, I still can't watch any of his stuff anymore. Um, like I've tried in like last year just to see if I could listen to Ravi Zacharias, and I couldn't get a few words in. It was yeah.
Yeah. There's something that happens in our minds. Same words,
Hmm.
same body image, but a whole different way of looking at them. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, see, we've been living with this scandalous leaders in evangelical Christianity and Christianity in general. Really,
Hmm.
has been around my whole life, and I'm 60, so I assume it's been around well before that. Of
Yeah.
course, the Protestant Reformation was a result, of scandalous Christianity. So, yeah, nothing new under the sun there. It's just, however, how we have to deal with it, and whether we can, whether we let it ruin our faith or not, or what. It seems to be part of the process of building our faith for some reason. I don't know quite what the Lord has in mind with this, but uh, it's just too ubiquitous
Hmm.
for it to be an accident. Don't you? I wonder.
Well, that dissuaded me from ever holding a person as an idol again. I think that that's or anything close to that. I'm like I'm so far away from that, where I'm like uh, I'm always expecting uh, leadership to fail me in some way, um, and so there's a
I'll make
certain
sure Paul
to that.
Vanderclay sees this section, so
Hmm.
that keep keep him on the straight and narrow. I'm
But even
kidding.
if you don't, we'll
I'm
be okay.
joking. I'm joking. I'm joking. Paul, you need to behave yourself. I can tease him now because I spent a weekend with him in Connecticut, as
Very
well
good.
with Michael Satori. So we are now a band of brothers. Um, I'm sorry to keep pursuing the personal. It just seems to
Hmm.
me as like I mean, we could speak about this in the abstract, but I don't know for how far we'll get. Is it? Let me put it this way: how much of what you said in that video, which I'm going to link in the show description, what how much of that content was influenced by your personal experience?
Um, I'm maybe confused where how it couldn't be influenced. Maybe like I think it's entirely influenced by my personal experience of both this little corner, my interactions with everybody. Like everybody has a certain level of separation always. So like even between my wife and I, we both have very different childhoods, very different places we grew up, and so any amount of communication, there's a layer of disconnect that has to be bridged over somehow, and uh, there's a certain level of wisdom that we all have to learn to be able to process that difference, and just noting that in that same way that I have a disconnect even from someone who's very close to me relationally. Uh, the same is true for people of other generations,
Well,
even if
okay.
there's more
How
disconnect.
long have you been married, by the way?
I've been married for just over a year.
Just over a year. Met after college, in college.
in college. Yeah,
Okay.
around the end of my third year of college, I'd say.
Okay. Are you close to your parents
Uh,
or the adults in your family?
Positionally or
No,
relationally?
emotionally. Emotionally,
Oh, pretty close. Yeah,
pretty close.
yeah.
Um, do you? Is it the kind of thing that you? Did you have the kind of relationship with them, your mother or your father? Um, I don't know how. I don't know. I don't know the whole story. Mother, father, stepfather.
Mhm.
The adults in your life, did you have a relationship with any of them that you could turn to them for advice or support, or we're getting married, did the whole family rally around you, or was it more like we just snuck off to get married?
Yeah,
You
no,
know how these
nothing.
things work out in people's lives. How
Yeah,
did it work out in yours?
mine's the most boring. It's everybody's super supportive. My parents were very much the type of people I could go to for advice. Um, I will say that uh, there are. Um, I would go to certain parents for different advice because I knew that they had more interest in other things. Um, so, like, my mom is um, not the person who loves to necessarily talk about theology all the time. My dad very much is the theology kind of nerd, and so if I want to talk about theology with one of my parents, my dad would be the person to probably talk to. Um, and so, you know, but that's kind of a normal like human thing. But beyond that, yeah, it's I had a very blessed family structure.
Did you find yourself wanting in a male role model, or did you find your because sometimes advice does this subject came up
Mhm.
in Connecticut in the estuary that retreat that we had at Paul's sister's farm, and I got challenged because I said I laid out my position, and I was challenged by someone in the group and said, well, who have you shared this with? Have you shared this with any young men in your life, Mark? And I said, well, I had to stop and think. And I'm like, because I don't have young men gathering around me and hear my son, my wisdom. I said, my son, he's just a
Mhm.
little older than you. Uh, and, uh, and most of it was modeled rather, it was whatever I gave him had to be caught more than taught. It was, and it seems to have worked in his
Mhm.
case. Um, so I guess what I'm wondering let me reframe the question. When you say advice, are you thinking words or are you thinking examples as in role
I
models?
Yeah, I keep it a little ambiguous because I think it's applicable in both of those situations. But I've definitely been thinking a lot about personally about uh, there's a certain difficulty in finding role models in general, especially like male role models, just because any subset of any set is smaller than the whole set, right? And uh, and not just role models, because I think my dad is a good role model, a good male role model, but he's also very far away physically from me. He lives on the other side of the country, and there's a certain level of, uh, you know, I can still talk to him every once in a while, and it's a good conversation, but it's not the same as having someone who's close by who I can meet with and talk with regularly. And um, of the men who I admire who are nearby, a lot of them are extremely busy, and I know this is probably on me. I don't feel comfortable going out and saying like, "Hey, give me some of your time, your valuable time that you could be spending with your wife and your kids, and you're not doing, ministry work on a college campus and already meeting with a bunch of young people. Like, add me to that list." Um, it's just not. I don't know. It feels a little
Well,
not
on
proper to
that
me.
note, just one thing that might just struck my that made me think. Jordan Peterson has brought this up about the way men share life experiences, and it's often side by side doing work.
Mhm.
So if you're worried about taking up their time, maybe you're thinking of it in terms of sit down time. You might consider approaching it as in just coming alongside and seeing, can I hold the broom while you, or I'll carry this for you while you go do that, or I'll join in their whatever work they're doing, and you might find, whether it's the lawn or whether it's, and then you might find, and that's just not just you personally, but this probably
Mhm.
goes for any young man out there, is that yes, people can seem very busy. That doesn't mean they're not interested in helping you, particularly if they know you and love you and care about you, either as friends or family. It may just, you might be surprised,
Mhm.
particularly if what you come along with is, can I lend a hand? I would like to talk to you while we drive off and herd cattle or whatever the heck you do in the Northwest. I mean, it's
Yeah.
or split logs or whatever cliche activity happens in the Northwest.
Well,
Yeah, go
I
ahead.
think a difficult, just again, this is personal, practical stuff, is that um, it's really hard in the Northwest to get people to do anything. And this has been something that is something that's been noted by everybody I know who has moved to the Pacific Northwest and has just lived here for a little bit.
Are you
Is
are you native there, or are you an import?
I half my life was in Maryland and then half my life has been here. So
Okay, go ahead. I'm sorry
I
to
have a
interrupt.
I have a little bit of experience, but
So getting people to do anything in the Northwest is difficult. Can you
yes,
flesh that out a little bit?
yeah. I have a friend who in college showed up on the first day of class, met a guy, and they had a great conversation, and um, it kicked off well. My friend is from California, and so he asks his classmate, um, "Hey, can I have your number and we can exchange contact information?" And they did it. And then my friend was thinking, well, like I want to hang out with this guy, so I'll invite him to have a meal. We're both on a college campus. We can go to the dining hall together or something. So we sent an email. It's like, hey, you want to grab dinner sometime? And the guy got a little weird about it. And then in the next day when they're in class together, the guy who he asked to eat with him said, you were just joking, right?" And my friend is like, "What?" And then the guy was like, "Well, if you want, we can like smoke weed sometime." He's like, "I no, like I'm good." And so it's just there's a certain like people like to sit inside alone around here, and it's hard to get people to show up. And if you want something to happen, you have to be the instigator for it, basically, and you have to pester people about it. And that's just been my experience of the social landscape, even of older people around here. It's pretty. People are pretty isolated and want to spend time with their families, and what gets them out is a work or certain social activities, and that's about it.
That's really interesting.
Mhm.
Is it because it's a cold, cloudy sort of place
The
most of
winters
the
don't
year?
help. Yeah, the winter you don't normally want to spend time outside more than you have to, but I'm sure that that does have an effect on it.
Hmm. Uh, I assume that's probably a rich pub culture there, isn't there?
Um, there's some.
I
There's
think of
a
cold weather environs, and I imagine people huddling in places where they can drink alcohol and warm up.
yeah,
That's why I just came up with
the
that. But
relatively hopping pub trivia kind of scene, and I
yeah,
mean
you
in the
just
Pacific Northwest in general.
yeah, it just
Yeah,
it's but maybe if they're all smoking weed,
usually
you're
not in
gonna
the
do
bars,
that in
but
your private residence. Go ahead. No.
oh no, no, I was just making I was just joking around that usually that doesn't happen in the bars themselves. But yeah,
No,
usually
no,
if
it does,
you're
doesn't.
doing it, you're
No.
doing it in your living room. Um,
Yeah, that's see, that's one of the things that I've noticed in the corner. Even we have quite a bit of cannabis consumption occurring, and I can tell. I mean, it's obvious even online, and
we
it's
love you,
it.
McMo and Tayo.
No names, no names. No, it's but that's in their case. I think of Tayo and well, they're all sweet, outgoing people as a rule,
Hmm.
but it's a very pacifying. Uh, one could even say isolating chemical. So I wonder it's if that's a part of it. Although I don't know, well, people my age, a lot of people my age, I guess, consume it. Um, yeah, different problem though, isn't it? That's not quite the same problem as we're addressing, but it could fuel some of your sense of, or some of the isolation that you observe, or maybe a better word, alienation you are observing between the generations. The neurochemical or the mind affecting substances people consume. If you know, because right, alcohol will tend to make you more gregarious and more outgoing unless you totally abuse it. It's considered a social disinhibitor, right?
Hmm.
Whereas pot is a bit of an all or nothing drug, and it's you can't sip, really. You you take it and it either lands or it doesn't, and until you and then once you by the time you feel it, it's too late. You've done you got you got more to go before it takes its full effect, and then you're laying on the couch eating Cheetos.
But it is interesting. I think my generation, weed is relatively popular. Um, Alcohol is getting less popular. Um, it's gone down in usage, and then with younger generations in like the generation in high school right now, um, all their substance use is going down, which is part of that too. And
Well, when you say Zoomer, you're thinking what? Born 2000 or later, this century? Is that
I think
is that definition
it's
of a
usually
Zoomer?
like
Give or take.
90, 95,
Oh,
and
that
later,
early?
depending. It depends on who you ask. I think usually 2000s, but I know people who'd say they're Zoomers who are
Hmm.
a little bit older. I'm like, yeah,
I
I think
think
it's the
yeah this
weird lines that are
the
drawn.
yeah the categories I saw I believe I found on Pew, and it was it I think they identified 99 2000, that right at
Hmm.
the end of the or the beginning of the century roughly. Um, Who do you feel most, as generationally speaking, who would Zoomers feel most alienated from? Because you've got several generations to pick from. Millennials, which might be older siblings,
Hmm.
older cousins, that sort of thing. Xers, which would probably be their parents, right? You were probably raised by Gen Xers, right?
Yes.
Or Boomers. The very very old. I mean, there's not a whole lot left, but you do have some of the
Hmm.
silent generation that are still around, of course.
Yeah.
But that's about it now. The greatest generation are almost all gone. They're 100 years old or something like that.
Yeah.
So
I don't have a lot of contact with boomers for the most part outside of TLC. Um, I have a guy who goes to my estuary and a few people I talk to here and there, but for the most part, my day to day is with a lot of millennials and then younger Gen X usually. And so the reactions I see usually is that Gen X is now coming into their own, and they're now kind of taking uh, a certain level of responsibility that they weren't able to up until this point. And so I think they're still trying to find out who they are. That's the impression I get from media and all that kind of stuff, and my parents as well. Just seeing that um, the that these places of authority are now kind of opening up for
you
people
think
of their generation.
politically or
I think
institutionally
just
leadership?
institutionally for the most part, politically also, but like for example, in this race, right, Kamala Harris is much younger than many of the people who have been in the running for a long time. She very much is showing this new trend of like potentially younger um, people closer to a Gen X age group being in
Right.
places of power.
Now, I don't want to freak you out, but just so you know, she is my age. She just looks
Oh, she is.
fantastic. Yeah, she's 60.
Oh, okay. Wait,
But when
are
you're
you on
running
the edge
against
there?
80, yeah, I'm right on the edge.
Yeah.
I got thrown in as a boomer, but I'm technically the last year.
Yeah.
1964 was when I was born. But Michael threw me in, threw me into that meat grinder called
Right.
boomers. Yes, but yeah, she's 60.
Hmm.
But see, 60 looks awfully young when your leaders have all been in their
Yeah.
late 70s and 80s.
Exactly. And so I see that, and then I see millennials. My interaction with millennials is usually um, a lot of complaining. That's usually how I see it. It's a lot of blaming other people for their problems, and I think that's been my experience with other like Gen Z people is like seeing that, um, and a lot of Harry Potter. That's basically my take on millennials is complaining, and Harry Potter is my read. Of course, there are exceptions. I love the millennials in this little corner and all
Well,
that.
there's a lot of them in this little
There
corner.
are, yeah. All my closest friends in this little corner are all basically millennials, so it's part of it. And then yeah, and then Gen Z, you know I see a lot of people who are desperately searching for something, and they um, yeah, I don't think they have direction right now.
So many questions, my friend. So many questions. And I got to pick one. I got to pick one
Hmm.
where to go. Um, of those generations, let's just try to close that loop. Um, which are you communicating? Who talks to you? Who talks to you in a way, or who's not talking gibberish to you when you say, I'm dealing with this issue. My generation is dealing with this issue or that issue.
I think
Whatever your concerns
millennials need to
are,
get it.
millennials get it.
Get it a little closer. I think when I
Okay.
speak, it's a little bit like we're speaking a closer language, but I think
Okay.
that's just because
That's
we're
common
close in
sense.
generation. Yeah,
Okay.
generation wise.
Do you
A few
get their
years won't be that big
resentment?
of a
Do you get their resentment? They're complaining?
I think it's pointed at the wrong place. But that's just my thing. I think it's it's this is one thing I wanted to mention, and maybe we can, if it's not helpful, we can kind of abandon it. But um, there's this concept of like the American dream that's really really huge, and I think millennials are still caught up in the American dream, and that's where a lot of their complaints come out of. Is that um, their ideal is still stuck in the idea of
Own
owning
a
a house,
home.
start a family. Why isn't not the institution, the culture set up in a way that this is an achievable thing? And so they'll point out that it was much easier to do all these things in past generations, and they'll pull up pictures from the 1940s of a happy family who the father works in a factory and the wife works from home, and says, well, why isn't it like this today? What can we do to have that, and all that kind of stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And I think my generation, this is just my opinion, is thoroughly disillusioned with the idea of the American dream. Like it's just not like no, that's just not a like that's not a good goal. I mean, not a good goal, but it's like it's not for everybody, and it doesn't have to be. And to a certain amount, everybody has their own kind of path that they need to go down. But the problem is now, what is that path? And I think that's the lostness is, if it's not the American dream, then what is it? And who knows? Maybe that's just working out really hard and getting really buff, and maybe that will make you happy. That kind of stuff.
Mm. So we're still chasing happiness.
Mhm.
Zoomers, millennials, Xers,
Contentment.
boomers.
Yeah.
Is that possibly part of our problem? Because it's
That
not a
it's
prior, it's not a high value in the corner.
the American dream.
Happiness.
Happiness.
You'll if you talk about happiness as I've been castigated for saying happiness is important. It's important that you're happy. I mean, not happy as in I just got back from Disneyland and had the time of my life. More as in, like you said, contentment, sense of purpose, place, usefulness. That's important too. I think young men and men in general, that they feel useful, and it's part of their happiness. Happiness also not being pulled this way and other by events and circumstances, a sense of rootedness, stability. All these things play into happiness as far as I'm concerned.
Yeah, maybe that's too broad of a word, because when I hear happiness, I hear like dopamine, like
Right,
what is going to maximize the dopamine flowing through my brain. Um,
right. And
Whereas
that's no,
I
yeah,
think there are people who are my generation, and probably others too, that they're searching for very different things. Some are searching for comfort. They just don't want to feel anything bad. They don't care about feeling good. They just don't want to they don't want to hurt. You have people who are searching for meaning. They want to feel like they have agency, and they want to have some sort of control. Um, and so it just kind of runs the gambit on what that looks like, and all of those could be happiness depending on how you interpret it.
I want to be respectful of your time. We're at about 54 minutes. How much time you got?
I don't really have a end time, so I'm good to
Okay.
go.
Okay. Um, so, like I said, lots of questions. All right. You can't speak for everybody. You can only speak for yourself. And maybe a little bit for your wife if she approves. Um, you know how these things go.
Hmm.
Uh, and
As
I'm
for me and my
sure,
house,
I'm sure whatever you say, if you ran it by her, she would put an asterisk by it and say, but you missed this and this and this. At least that's how it goes
exactly.
in
Yeah.
my house.
Hmm.
So all these caveats stated aside, so we'll how would you have you made any progress towards defining this for yourself in terms of the sense of what to pursue? If the American dream is not it, what's it?
Yeah. And that's where I would say sainthood makes the most sense of any kind of answer I've heard is and sainthood as in um being the best person I can possibly be. And with the understanding that that's not going to look like the best person that Mark can be. It's going to be the best person that Noah can be with the gifts and the way that I work. And so finding out how that all lines up has been what my processing has been. So uh, I think I came to that realization when reading Chesterton's biography of Saint Francis of Assisi, uh, alongside with who was the other one? Bonaventure's biography of Saint Francis as well, and seeing how he felt called to a very specific and weird lifestyle that involved total just rejection of wealth. Um, every day he would go out and beg for money to basically survive, and that was the way he saw that God was working in the world and his relationship to it, and the way that Chesterton kind of interprets that by the end is he sees the Franciscans all gather and they are challenging the church to say you should sell all of your gold and your art and you should take a vow of poverty like us. And the church says no, but we do see what good this does, and you are part of our family, and you have a place among us, but that's not going to be the standard for all of us. And finding that relationship, I think was something like, oh, okay, I see that's my relationship to the world as well. Is I'm not going to look like everybody else, but how can I use my gifts uniquely that will maybe not do good, but will do good. What that entirely works out to, I don't know, but something like faith that God will do what He needs to.
Sorry about that noise. That was my computer. Um, that's rather individualistic. Do you, in your view,
Mm-hmm.
this is very American, and these things we can't help. I'm
Mm-hmm.
not. I'm not. That's not a knock. That's just a observation that you're even though you may feel like your generation has moved on from some things, that's something, individualism is one of them that you're still have in your DNA.
Yeah.
Do you?
I'm also extremely contrarian, so that's part of that too. Is that I very much, if I see the waves going one way, I'm very much looking to go the opposite direction. That's
Okay.
just that's just
So
part of
where are the
my
waves
DNA.
going? Okay, if you're going, if this is the way you see, because I could. Well, there's a couple things here. One, are you most inspired by Chesterton's take on Francis, or are you most inspired by Francis? Do you understand the question?
Hmm. Well, it's different, right? Chesterton's his piece of interpretation is extremely helpful because his goal is to take the life of Saint Francis and make sure it's put in the right context. Because his goal for writing that book was um, to counter the numerous people who are trying to take the life of Saint Francis as a um, as a weapon against the church, to say Saint Francis was great, but you know he couldn't help but be religious. That was incidental. And if Saint Francis was here today, he would tell us all to take about poverty, but he would not be religious. He would just understand that all men are made equal, or not made equal, or just are equal outside of the context of religion. And so very much Chesterton's trying to strike this line, saying there is actually something very important that's going on here. But at the same time, I'm very struck by Francis because himself, because of how he seems to be able to read the signs of which way he needs to be going, and isn't afraid to just do it. He just goes, and I can't help but bring up Chesterton, but Chesterton talks about in Orthodoxy about how he compares Tolstoy and Nietzsche, and says Tolstoy admires poverty, and but he's an aristocrat, and Nietzsche admires war, but he's a coward. And Joan of Arc is both of those things. She was poor and she was a warrior, and she didn't stop to like admire any of these things. Like she went down the path that was ahead of her like a thunderbolt. That image has been stuck in my head of this like as soon as she knew the path ahead of her, she did not take a second to stop. She went down it, and she followed God that way.
Yeah. No, that's good. She definitely so well, and you didn't limit your study of Francis to just Chesterton. You mentioned Bonaventure in his biography. Boy, that's hard though to do when you're a married man. How do
It
you how?
depends.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, do you see children in your future, or is it you and your wife?
I see children in the future eventually. Yeah. We're still kind of deciding what that looks like, but I
Yeah.
think uh, we look at having children as being something that's definitely in our future.
See, these things have a way of, even the Apostle Paul brings it up in his letters. You know, it's particularly, I think it's the
Mm-hmm.
first letter to the Corinthians. It's you know, it's the saints. Well, okay, let's put it this way: the all evil dictatorships, they all know how to put the screws to the would be activist rebel, and that is to go after their family, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
That attachment, those attachments, whether it's a spouse or children, or even parents, but more spouse and children, it seems, does just pull us and tie us to the earth in a sense. And it's in a good way too. It's not all. It keeps us real.
I
So how do you project yourself going forward with that in mind?
Yeah. Well, I think there's one thing that uh, my view of the saints is not that they are disconnected from life, that they are uh, separated from deep attachments. Uh, like even Francis, as someone who has rejected all wealth in his life, and he's um, living off of alms. He has a deep connection to his brothers and his disciples, if you want to call them that, uh, and I'm sure if somebody wanted to go after Francis, the way to break his heart would be to hurt his brothers. Like that would be the very clear way to hurt him, or to hurt any of the poor, right? Like he had a deep love of these people, and then it's not to say it's the same thing as being married, of course, because marriage is very different. But I think I think I don't I'm learning how to live in trust that um, I felt God moving this way, and so I'm going to follow Him. And even if it doesn't quite make sense, if it's not the story that I see everywhere else, then I'm not going to sit out and question and say like why am I getting married and all the saints seem to be single? Um, I I want to I don't know. I want to be uh, obedient. I want to be obedient. I need to learn how to listen. Maybe would be the way to go. And so that's probably
Well,
my
did
next
you
step.
listen? Okay, this goes to the nature of your relationship with Christ, I suppose.
Mhm.
Um, uh, did any of this come into play when you decided to get married?
Mhm. I think there's very much a chance encounter relationship with my wife from day one, and um, and understanding that like uh, even though she wasn't a Christian when we first met, that this was an extremely important part of my life, and um, that it was going to be at the center of any relationship that we did have. Um, and so that's been always kind of in mind, where it's like um, trusting God with this relationship always, uh, and putting it into His hands, and him being, or praying that He will do with it what He will. That's been on my mind since very early on. Honestly, before we were dating, to be honest, about this relationship.
You mentioned you're a contrarian. You see things going one way, and I'm getting a picture of where you're going. So where are the herd of Zoomers going? If you're moving in this direction and you're aspiring to
Mm.
sainthood, as you understand it, I should be talking to my microphone. Apologies. Um, uh, where
Yeah,
where's the herd going? If you're going in one direction towards sainthood, where's the herd? Where's the majority of Zoomers going?
I think that's the problem, that it's it feels almost like a dysphoria. Like it feels like everybody's kind of taking their own direction, and um, it feels like a scattering, or um, I don't know. The image I have is all the sheep running away. Like a large sound goes off and they're running away, or a few fall over and are just sitting there. And I think for the most part, it's a lot of people who are just living their life, and the common word is like infantilization. It's the I know people who have graduated college, and um, they had long-term partners, and they said, I'm not ready to be an adult enough to live with another person, even if it's my romantic partner. And so I'm going to move back into my parents' house, and not try to find a job. And um, I just want to be a kid a little bit longer. Is kind of not even the subtext, is actually the way they talk. Like, I'm still a child is the way the terms they'll use. And I think that's the if there is any current, it's that stillness maybe is the default.
We started the conversation talking about generational handoff, and it seems to me that what we're addressing now is in terms of a bit of finding the resources within to make up for whatever deficits we find in our lives. Uh, to pick ourselves up, to give ourselves direction, to respond to the moment. Um, do you agree or disagree?
I agree. That seems to be where this is going a little bit. But I think it's all out of the context of uh, the reason why it's so individualistic, at least in my mind, is that um, like who else would it be? Is kind of the question that comes to my mind. Like if you're not going to do it, who else is going to do it? Um,
Do what?
do all that work. Do the work of giving direction, of providing support, of um, I don't know. I hear people all the time, and it's just kind of the attitude of these conversations seems to be a lot along the lines of you didn't give me what I needed, or um, uh, you know, you didn't raise me right. Is kind of the attitude that I hear, and there's a certain point of like that might be true. Like so what? Like it's over. It happened. Um, it's the unforgiveness kind of side of it that kind of frustrates me, and there's a certain point where it's like if somebody hurt you, like just don't put yourself in a place to be hurt by them again, and like don't give them the time of day and move on. And learning how to move on is the tough part, because now you feel at a disadvantage, but you've got to learn how to keep going.
What turned the lights on for you? Because as you said at one point, you're a recovering nihilist, and well, that at what point did you recover, and what helped you recover? I mean, did you? You seem very much in your what the left brain right brain thing, and I can never remember which one's which. But you seem very much a rational, analytical kind of person.
Mm-hmm.
Are you a rational, analytical kind of person who had on the road to Damascus experience, or did you think your way to this position and this place in your life?
I'd say like the effect Chesterton had on me was that he showed um, the end of thought to a certain extent, and then showed me the beauty of poetry and the appreciation of art. I know this isn't quite answering what you were saying, but like I'd say I'm still struggling with nihilism. Like I can feel it regularly, um, nearly daily. Just like the pull of like what was the entropy? I think is often the word too of this like um, this slowing down, this um, that force. And so I don't think you can think your way out of it, because I think there's a certain level of trust. Um, there's a certain level that only beauty can play, or only art can play. Uh, so
Do you go
just
to church?
Mhm.
Now, you guys go to church.
I do.
Did you ever stop going to church?
No, I for the beginning of college, for the first couple of months, I didn't go to a church, but I went to a college ministry. So
Okay.
I still went to a religious service
So the
weekly.
Christian faith, whatever
Mm-hmm.
evangelical of some kind, I guess,
Mm-hmm.
it never stopped being influenced, even though you never fully deconstructed and said, I'm done.
No.
You just, so are we talking, when you say nihilist, is it more feelings then? Or is it like in a sense that, or are you trying to convince, is your mind wrestling with, when you say, I feel the tug of nihilism every day, is it that um, faith, a life of faith, however defined, just is somehow intellectually unconvincing, and that layer or that percentage of your experience that of faith that is the it's Well, is it that is there a sense in which the nihilism is intellectually more convincing, but the faith is emotionally more satisfying, and this is the source of difficulty? I'm not saying it very
Yeah,
well, but I hope I'm communicating.
no, I think part of it is that uh, there's a trust that's there that needs to be there, and that's kind of part of it. And maybe I could lay this out, but like my conception of what this nihilism looks like is something like, I don't see the ends of this. Like my mind is very stuck in the Ecclesiastes. There's nothing new under the sun. Um, that all this seems to be in vain to a certain amount. That you know, going to work and uh, I do my work. I turn it in, um, because I work in a big organization. Who knows? Some of it might even get thrown away and not used or unacknowledged. It gets lost in the machinery of things. I come home, I work on a YouTube video. It's not very good. I post it to the internet and nobody watches it. Um, and I play a video game, and what do I get from it? I don't get anything from it, um, because what could I get? And having to trust that, like, anything I do, if it has any meaning at all, has to be found, has to be given by God. Like there's no other option for me. And so, um, the nihilism to a certain extent feels like the default, and the Christian side is um, there's no other practical answer for me. So like this is the
So it's kind of reversed than what I framed it. It's like the Christianity is intellectually is what makes the most sense, or the faith, the life of faith makes the most sense intellectually, but you don't feel it in your bones quite so much. Is what you feel is the creepy nihilism
I don't know. Well, and I think there
to
is a
life.
level of there's a level of both sides. There's the intellectual side, which is the like, if I rationally work this out, like what are the ends of anything I do? That's part of the intellectual, and part of the feeling is seeing the chaos, seeing people. I mean, election season's the worst for this, right? Seeing people who are freaking out about all of this, people who are saying this is the most important election of your lifetime, and if you vote for a third party, you are betraying us. If you don't vote, you're even worse. You're scum, and
Or if you
seeing all
vote the
that.
wrong way, you're worse than scum.
True. You're the devil, basically.
Mm-hmm.
It's you're the accuser, the um and there's a certain sense of like, is that again, the Ecclesiastes sense of like, this doesn't mean anything. Like there's a certain point where it's like there are going to be effects from this. But the selection of the president, who's very much a figurehead role in many ways, in what I've seen, there are a few practical implications that come out of the role, of course, and there's a certain culture setting that happens in that role. But on the day to day, it's not going to change most people's lives. And so I kind of come to the conclusion, I'm like, all these things that people talk about as being the most important thing are not. And having to remember that there is an important thing, and just because there's a lot of people who don't understand what is important doesn't mean that there isn't such thing as an important thing. Uh, and so again, it's feeling like I don't separate it necessarily. Like it's feelings and thinking all at the same time. It's an entire being, um, that's all unified.
I think we're getting to something that's really important for people. Uh, just bear with me.
No worries.
Forgive me getting personal again.
No worries.
See, I've experienced the same difficulties. I experience it on a regular basis in terms of I call myself happy clappy because it's the only way to describe. To me, it's I borrow the phrase from Elizabeth Oldfield
Hmm.
and Luke recently. He forced my hand. I had to start defining it because for me it was just I didn't think my way into this place. I'm not here in the corner or making these videos because I thought my way into it. As in
Hmm.
rationally, it's like God is not a is faith in God is not was not my faith in God was not arrived through a logical proof. Put it that way.
Yeah.
It was just a it was an encounter, and it was very much boom. And if you and growing up within Pentecostal circles, I assume you have some sense of that, or was that? Well, let me put this. Let me ask this: as growing up Pentecostal, did that turn you off from happy clappy? Do you? I mean, was there too much feels, too much slaying of the spirit, too much speaking in tongues, too much, so that when you grow up in that, it's like,
I mean, if there
I want a little more Calvin or a little more Wesley.
honestly, if there was anything, it would be um, in the Pentecostal space. There's a tendency for some to be performative in their faith. That that it feels like, and I'm not talking about what's happening on stage because I think that's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about like
I
day to
agree.
day interactions
Right, right.
where like people are talking, and I'm like, are are you like this all the time? Like, are you honestly like it feels like everything is happy, like it's always a joyful experience and nothing hard happens. And when difficult things are brought up or like things like that, it feels like it sometimes gets brushed off.
Well, I feel like
Luckily,
Pentecostals are the most challenged people I meet. I mean, usually they're dealing with. Go ahead. I interrupted. I didn't. I
no, no, no.
didn't.
I'm just repositioning.
No,
um,
no. When I think of, I mean, well, let's define it really quickly, so
mhm.
that we're on the same track. When Pentecostalism or charismania or charismatics, whatever you want to call it, with which I probably most identify. I throw around the most disparaging word I can, just because I rather embrace it rather than fight it. As I'm a full on charismaniac who goes to a Church of Christ, so figure that one out. But to me, Pentecostalism, charismatic thinking, is the belief that God cares about the minutia of your life
Mhm.
and intervenes. You can expect him to intervene on a regular basis.
Mhm.
Most Christians, even devout Christians, tend to think that they back off and say that's a bit much. I don't know if God really cares. I mean, some Pentecostals go so far as it's like, you know, should I have enchiladas or tuna sandwich?
Mhm.
I mean, but I respect that level of attention. And that kind of approach seems to me like your attraction to the saints, like Joan, like Francis, that seems to me possibly your Pentecostal upbringing coming out, just refracted in a slightly different way.
Yeah, I think part of what I admire about that is that it's so like the uh,
It's
I don't
all
know how to say it.
in. It's
It's
all
the
in.
software and the hardware is all integrated. Like it's not
Yes.
there isn't a point to need to just say like, oh God, give me a sign that if I should have spaghetti and meatballs or pizza tonight. It's like no, like they were able to like make that, like they just knew, and it's because they spent, all that work is also done in every other point of their life. Like it's not like there's a point where they're now asking the question. It's the pray without ceasing. Like they're just so in it. Like they're fully
And when
there.
you run out of words in English, you just move on to another language,
Hmm.
right?
Yeah. Hmm.
Whatever sounds come out. I got to preach the gospel, so I'm out of humans. They're the birds. That's Francis's. This
Yeah,
is
that's
very
very
much the same thing,
yeah.
right?
Hmm.
Okay, this audience is done with me. You're here, so you're going to hear my story, or you're going
Yeah.
to hear about the Lord. Whatever is, I don't remember what he preached to the birds, but he was alleged to have preached to the birds. So yeah, so this is, and does that I mean, people can't see you, but I feel like
Hmm.
that's what resonates with you, though. That seems to me your physical demeanor changed when you touched on this subject and you were explaining to me just what you the integration of the
Yeah. The two pieces. I think that's part of it, and then that's part of the reason I think why I get frustrated when I see, when I go to church and I see people who are, um, who it feels like they're putting on an act, and I don't know their hearts, but it feels phony sometimes, and that's kind of the difficulty. And at least the leaders of the church, I don't feel that way about, but it's just some people I interact with where I'm like, I don't see it. Like I know I'm not there, but it feels like you think you're there, and that's a little bit of the disconnect where it's like I know I'm not a good Christian, but I'm willing to admit it. um
well, you only know you're there until when you're there. When
mhm.
when when the gun barrel is against your head, right? And you
Yeah.
really are under pressure and you make the decision one way or another, right? I mean,
Hmm.
Peter didn't know. Peter got challenged, right? Peter, and in his case he failed, but then he came back. Judas failed and didn't come back.
Yeah.
But for all of us, it's whether it's Bonhoeffer or Joan or Francis was so hardcore. I mean, Francis was. I mean, he's thanking the hot iron, a red hot iron that's going to burn out his eyes.
Yeah.
For people who don't know, he had a disease in the eye, and the solution was to presumably to save his life was to more or less use a hot poker on his eyeballs. That I can't imagine what they were thinking, but
Yeah.
and he's blessing it before it happens. That's the kind of character he was. Um, okay, let's try to land the plane. What else would you say? I mean, we don't really. I don't feel like we satisfactorily answered the challenge of saying what the generational handoff should be, but I do think that for the problems of our times for young people, whether they be millennial or Gen Z, and then the alphas, whatever they face, well, it'll be really interesting and
Yeah.
how they respond. But well, shoot, I got to ask this question. This is not going to land the plane, I'm afraid.
No worries.
The We're in the corner, incredibly diverse, a wide variety of people with a wide variety of ideas about what a life of faith is. Not even the same faith, right? Not even within Christendom, and even within that, there are some even. We have Jews, we have Orthodox, we have Catholics, we have all varieties of evangelicalism and Protestantism, and then we have some unchurched evangelicals. We have some by choice, some not by choice. They just feel out of sorts and have not found a church. They have people who are still trying to they kind of believe but are trying to figure their way out. There's the full on Peterson sphere. It's they're not really in a it's not a relationship of faith that they're in right now at all. It's ideas, it's vervaki, it's psychology. You get my saying. So
Mhm.
you're coming in. It's Joan. It's Francis. It's the faith articulated by G.K. Chesterton.
Who are all
How do you?
Catholics too.
That's true. Good
Yeah,
point. Very good point.
yeah.
And you still a Pentecostal, I assume, right?
Well, that's my that's part of my contrarianism is that
Okay.
when I talk to Pentecostals, I'm like, man, I feel like a Catholic. And I talk to all of my Catholic friends, and I'm like, man, I'm so Protestant. I
So go on with that. Keep going with that because
yeah.
that's what I'm trying to fit it. How do you fit it? It's just is it the contrarianism? That's the point. And being in the corner as you are satisfies you because you don't come off as you're not an in your face contrarian. No
No,
one would know that Noah is a contrarian talking to Noah. It only comes out through the dialogue.
I don't know. It's a little bit of a yeah. It comes out through the dialogue. It comes out through if I see a conversation's going one way, there's a little bit of like a maybe a troll kind of instinct that comes onto my face, and I'm like, oh, I'm gonna see what's gonna happen when I throw this into the conversation. That's the fun part because uh, among people I know in Pentecostal circles and my small groups and stuff, um, a lot of them don't know anything about anything outside of their tradition of Christianity. It's very much on that end, and um, when you bring up, especially among you know older how do I say this, early younger Gen X, late millennial aged Pentecostals, if you bring up Catholicism, they have an allergic reaction to it very quickly, and I think a lot of that's inherited, and trying to navigate that is an
I have
interesting
the same problem
experience.
in my church with all the old folks, and they're
Yes,
all
especially
old.
with the oldest. Yeah.
And it's Church of Christ, and of course they have nothing good to say about Pentecostals either. So I whole other subject for another time. Keep going.
Yeah. And so TLC is somewhere that has been a great experience of being able to not have to process uh, or not have to worry about stepping on people's toes for the most part, of being able to have these conversations, to
Yeah.
not worry about where you're getting stuff from. I mentioned the other day just to somebody that, or to my small group actually, which maybe wasn't the best place for this, that I was like, oh, I remembered this line, and I was wondering where, like, what part of the Bible it was. So I looked it up, and I was like, oh, I realized it was from the Quran, and they're like shocked, and I was like, that's not a, that doesn't seem crazy to me. That's
No.
totally fine. Like I don't, um,
It's not crazy, but I can see why it'd be triggering.
yeah.
Yeah.
And if they knew the section, I think they wouldn't have had a problem with it because it's just like a poetic image, really, is what it was. But it was a bit triggering, and so to TLC is a place where like if I had said that, no one would have bat an eye. They would have been like, oh, what was it, or they would have been more interested in
Right.
the
It's
content and
true.
not the
That's very true.
uh,
So you can find fellowship and diversity in the
mhm.
TLC that you can't. That diversity will cause dissension
Yeah.
or worse.
There there's a certain this is, I don't know about your experience of Northwest Jewelry, but my experience when I was coming back was I when I was driving away, I was crying because there was a certain level of me that saw that like the community that was there um, was what I wish church was.
Mm.
Like I wish church was like this, like in on a regular basis. I wish I would be around this group of people regularly, being able to like um, when I was there, I felt like I could walk up to anybody and ask them their story, and they would have happily obliged, and we could have sat down and talked for hours, and then I could have just, found someone else and talked to them for hours, and then I could bring them together and talk. And um, I don't necessarily feel that way at church, which made me really sad. Um, that I felt like I got a taste of something that was close to what, um, and I don't want to be uh, prideful or anything, but it's like I think this is what the image of church should be. Like, it actually should be something approaching this. Um, and how do I even try to bring some of that home with me and plant that seed or foster that? Um,
You do lead a don't you lead an estuary group
I do,
locally?
yeah. Hmm.
Is it does it have the same flavor as what you experienced at North Estuary, or is it a little more something? Is it different? Or do you? And you're free not to answer if that
No,
corresponds.
no, I don't know if this is proper to say, but I think it's too Christian right now. Like, I think it's too it's there's too much Christianese kind of flying by. Like, I want some, like, new Christians or like agnostics, and we have a little bit of that DNA in the group, but for the most part, it tends to sit around very much. Uh, um, it still has the DNA of like Christianese, and so I'm trying to find a way to, like, separate the language that we have and, like, find it or kind of root it in something that's a little bit closer to what seems more real.
Well, Ron Copperman and I were talking after the whole Connecticut thing, and because he wanted some explanation of what estuary is, because he's like, and we struggled to try to, because, and Ron and I in some ways have, of people in the corner, him and I probably understand each other fairly well. We've had a lot of discussions, live streams together. Um, but on this point, we seem to struggle, because, and I myself struggle with this, because there's an aspect to, um, my I wasn't Assemblies of God. My charismania comes via the Vineyard and John Wimber. I don't know if you're acquainted with any of that, because he would have been dead before you were born. But it's a different theological flavor, so to speak. But the attitude is that you look for people who, if you're trying to help somebody, you basically you have what you can only give what you have, is would be Wimber's point of view. And all it's the kind of approach to ministry that you find in the second chapter of Acts, right? Peter's preaching, and he comes to the man in the what is it, the invalid in
Mm-hmm.
front of the temple, and he says, "Silver and gold have I none, but what I have, I'll give to you. Rise, whatever, walk." And it's this whole Pentecostal, I think. Well, in the it's a vineyard. The vineyard approach was, you know, you have a problem, and I think is just mainstreamed now within all forms of Pentecostalism, is that, what you need is more of Jesus. That's going to
Mm-hmm.
solve all your problems. Estuary pushes against that almost by definition. Um, and there's a tension. I feel that tension within me. Because there's a part of me that says I want to, and this was what Ron was saying. I've found the answer. I don't need to look for it. I found it. I experienced it. And whatever failings I'm going through now, it's just that I've not he didn't quite say it this way, but I've not, these are weaknesses in my own faith, and I've not applied them yet to myself.
Hmm.
Therese Neumann came up. She's a kind of modern day saint who lived on a Eucharist wafer a day during Nazi during the Nazi part of her lifetime anyway. Was lived during the Nazi era, Germany and or Austria, I can't remember which. And she, I can't remember whether she was Austrian or German. Is what I'm saying. I think she was German. And she was such a powerful saint that, and she had the stigmata and the whole 9 yards. She was such a powerful saint, she even freaked out Hitler. So the Nazis basically left her alone, and even though her presence defied them. But she was this very powerful, very strange sort of saint. And I'm like going, I don't live that way, not my reality. If I try to live on a wafer a day, I'm dead. I'll be dead in however long it takes to exhaust my resources.
Hmm.
And Ron's response to that was, it's just my faith isn't there yet. You see what I'm saying? That's a very Pentecostal approach to the problem. My faith hasn't arrived to a point where I can live on a Eucharist wafer a day. Whereas I think I take estuary and I take most of the Corner's approach to life as being more modern and more just not oriented in that direction. There's a question in there somewhere, but
yeah, I can play around with it because I don't see it that way. I don't see it as I'm going to estuary to do that same work. I would frame it differently. Like, God is in all creation, and because of that, everything good comes from God. And so no matter who you are, if you say something that has an element of truth in it, then God is somewhere in there. And understanding that no matter the tradition you have, you don't have a monopoly on the truth. That God will not be God will not be shamed or mocked. Yes, you can't put him in a box, right? And so even if I fully understand, my own tradition, I know that another tradition is going to have a different perspective if I trust that we both see God in different ways.
And that's the richness of estuary, right? You find out about all those traditions.
Mm-hmm.
Keep going.
And like, you have degrees of clarity in what you see, but you also have this sense of when you have one tradition, it's monofocal, it's very 2D. But then as you have more eyes that are seeing it, you see it in a greater level of dimensions. So once you have two eyes, you can begin to see some depth. And then as you have more input, you can be able to see the complexity of a faith of God. And in that experience, you can begin to not understand God, because then you're putting him into a box again. But you're able to break down your own conception of what you think is fully true, and you're able to break down your walls that shouldn't be there, and you should continue to restructure. It's doing the deconstruction work before the flood comes, right? It's the I want to test my walls. I want to make sure that I'm not leaving anybody out of this box, or it's all those pieces to me. That's the real job of estuary, is it's every tribe and tongue like worshiping God. It's that element, and seeing that even people who aren't Christians have something beautiful to add, and being able to negotiate those differences, and understands that even in those differences, is there something that you can connect with and see. So
So, what has estuary done to your approach to the faith? If we want to, we can close on this if you like.
yeah, it's just I don't know. I haven't been doing it for very long, but the people who have been affected by it have affected me, and so that's part of the reason why I want to continue it is because I've experienced that. Um, but what brought me here was, uh, I have close Catholic friends, and I've watched Jonathan Peugeot, and I've seen all these people who uh, will often castigate people of my tradition as being like the worst example of Christians. But despite that, when they say the things that I would disagree with, I find myself totally agreeing with them. And so I need a space to negotiate that. Like, why do you think that I would disagree with you?
Mm-hmm.
And estuary is the only place where I see that happening. Like, I don't see that happening anywhere else except for maybe TLC, but with like people who aren't, always online.
Yeah, when I say it, I should have said TLC or slash estuary because I kind of I conflate them in my mind for some reason. If church looked more like the North Estuary Conference, what would church look like then? Because there
Well,
was no worship to speak of.
I will say I think it's more about um, the relationality of it. I don't think estuary church should look exactly like estuary. Um, I am with the people who will say that because I think estuary is very much a fringe thing. Like it's very much dealing on the edges of faith, and it's very much an interfaith space that should not be owned by Christianity. Even though that's my main relationship with it is through my faith.
I'm sorry to keep asking questions, but
No
does
worries.
your church, when you are the ones that you've gone to in the past, your favorite church? Let me put it that way. Have you had a period at which it's favorite? Did you ever have a favorite church or a favorite church experience for a period of time, or has it all basically been the same for you?
Um, no, I've had churches that I've enjoyed more or less.
Okay, so
But I
out of
don't.
the ones,
Yeah,
I'm sorry, but out of the one, I'll let you finish in a second. But
no
out of the
worries.
one that you'd say is your favorite, if we could call a favorite, um, were they all preacher driven? Were they preacher and band ministry driven, or was there room or space for what we used to call testifying, or for the laity to stand up and share and possibly preach and prophesy and do all the things that we are notorious for doing in the happy clappy circle?
Yeah. My church, because my favorite is the one I go to right now. On a Sunday, it's very much, you show up, you sit down, you sing a few songs, um, and then there's announcements, and then the preacher speaks for a while. There's some songs to close it out. There might be like a pseudo altar call, and then then we would close. Um, but what I've loved about the church I'm in is that it's it doesn't stop on Sunday. Like there are things going on. There's a heavy emphasis on small groups and understanding that there's an element of church that needs to happen outside of Sunday, and um, their heavy involvement in youth. They're partnered with the ministry that I attended in college. They have a thriving high school, middle school aged ministry that meets um, and does small groups within that ministry as well, where usually like college aged or kids right out of college will come and will meet with like a group of 5 or 6 young people, and they'll have their own small group in Bible study. And so it's very much focused on not being satisfied with just Sunday.
And so in small groups is where you're feeling it the most, your
Um,
attachment to, or your, or is it just it all plays together as a.
I think it all plays together. Like there's a certain the philosophy I admire that of you know wrapping around a person's life that there's nothing outside of the purview of your faith. Like it should have an effect on all of it, and that's very much something that I'm attracted to, and something that has been a constant learning process for myself. So
Okay, so now I think I can land this plane. You've okay. We're gonna turn the tables now, because
mhm.
it was you began with you looking back or out to previous older people, older generations, and now it seems like you feel like you are arriving at a life course. Even if it doesn't, I mean, I'm just listening to you. I get a sense that here's a man who's pulling it together. He's still young. Most of his life is still ahead of him. But there is a sense of direction.
Mhm.
There's a sense of contentment. Would that be fair? Tell me if I'm wrong.
uh I don't know. I'm
Not
a
not
little
complete, but it's
yeah,
coming together.
a little bit, but then I'm scared of contentment, and I think maybe that's as we've been talking, that contrarianness in myself, I think might be better stated as I don't like still water. Like I want something moving. Like I don't like people being satisfied with where they're sitting and thinking that they've made it. Like I want people to constantly be striving to be
So
better.
that's a
And so
value.
mhm,
That's a value you've arrived at, right? So I'm
yeah,
wondering. So is that a value you expect to keep? Is that going to be a lifelong value, or is this,
I
or
hope
is
so.
okay?
Yeah, and I think that's part of what I my framing of sainthood is that you never reach a point where you're like, I've made it. I can sit on my laurels and I can live the rest of my life out happy with how I've lived it. My hope is that it's a sounds horrible. I hope it's a struggle to the very end. It's like I want this to be like I hope that um, till the very end that there's no loss of love for life or a a laying down, but like you know
Not
it's a
giving
struggle.
up.
Like it's a
You're going
fight.
to keep
Yeah,
struggling to the end,
yeah.
in a sense.
Because
Uh,
nihilism, I think, is the opposite. It's the laying down and just letting it happen.
right. So beautiful.
Mhm.
So there's a sense of purpose. So we've got a value, and there's you actually have a stated value and a sense of purpose that's attached to it for your life. Now it's all abstract, and we all these things all get boiled down into particulars later, but that's something to work with. Now, like I said, we want to turn the tables. You're going to look now. You're going to look down because you mentioned the thriving high school, middle school ministry at your church, and you're looking at those baby Zoomers and alphas. Well, how old are alphas at this point? They're still are they adolescent yet?
I think they're getting there. They're kind of
Getting
close.
there. So you're
Yeah.
looking at these either the youngsters
Mhm.
who are clearly to them you're an old man.
Yeah.
Generational handoff. What do you
Yeah.
have to say to them?
That's what I'm still trying to work out. Like I think my whole thing has been it's I'm still trying to find out how you package this for everybody. Like I think right now I'm trying to because it feels like there isn't a box anymore that you can pull stuff out of. It feels very like, okay, how am I going to work this out, and then beginning to work on, once I feel like I've gotten close, working on it with other people and seeing how much of it applies to others my age and younger. and then being able to say, you know what, um, I hope this helps, and I'm going to work with you, and we're going to find out if this works. But like, this is what I have so far. These are the tools that I have, but that's still a process that I think is going to have to be worked through. And maybe that's the whole AA thing that Chad keeps talking about how um, the place where this work really gets done is when you're a sponsor, and only when you're a sponsor does that actually go through. And I think that might be part of that too. Is that as much as work as you think you can do on your own, you're a lot of that's going to be done in relationship with other people.
Very good. Let's call it. Thank you.
Sounds good.
Are you happy? Do you feel like
Yeah.
we did okay?
Yeah.
And then, so do you want to review the video or audio? And are you
I'm fine. I'm comfortable with everything I talked about and shared.
okay? Good. And if you like, everyone's sending me pictures. It's a whole becoming a whole it's a genre of thumbnail pictures for me now. It's strange, slightly off center, difficult to make work pictures, but they actually seem to be, they have a flavor all their own. So if you have a favorite picture or avatar of yourself, send it. I'm sure I could screenshot this and
I can
make it
also
work.
make this a green screen if you want. If you want to just be able to crop me out or something. But
Well, what happens is yeah, I use Canva, so I can pretty much take out any background I want. So
oh,
it works really well. But if you have a favorite picture of yourself, email it to me. Like Howard, last name Howard, Chris Howard. Sorry,
mm-hmm.
he sent me a picture of himself eating a pork chop at a state fair. And it actually worked really well because when he sent this to me, what am I gonna do with this? And then it took about 5 minutes of meditation, and all of a sudden, like, oh, well, this could be interesting. This works because he's got a funny look on his face. He's got a ball cap on. He's looking at the camera out of the corner of his eye with this state fair pork chop in his mouth. So it's going to be a pretty good thumbnail. So yeah, anything goes. And that's that. And did I miss anything? Should we? I mean, we're still recording, and I can cut in anything you want. So did I miss something? Is there something you wanted to say?
No,
Good,
I think that was great.
good. I felt like we got a good conversation.
I
Thank
think
you,
so too.
sir. President Foxman, Noah, thank you. Are you looking forward to the end of this election?
Yes. Yeah.
Me too.
Uncertainty is not one of my favorite things.
Yeah,
But
well, then we'll deal with whatever problems arise, right?
yeah,
Yeah. All right. Well,
yeah.
well, God bless you and enjoy your life with your still young wife,
hmm
newlyweds, because you're newlyweds for like the first 2 years, aren't you, or something like that? People say. So, do you feel like newlyweds still?
Somewhat. Yeah.
Yeah. Good.
It. Yeah. I think even when we were dating, it felt like we had known each other for a long time, and so
Oh,
there's a certain level of like familiarity that I feel with her
good.
still. But
Nice.
yeah,
All right. Well, have a good night. Thanks
you
for the
too.
time. I really
Yeah.
appreciate it. You did great, and you're a great guest. So I appreciate
Thank
it.
you.
Thank you.